They called me a gold digger behind my back. His mother even slipped me a prenup at our engagement dinner. Little did they know, my net worth was 10 times his. I kept my wealth hidden for a reason, but that night, everything changed. If you've ever been judged unfairly, or had to hide part of yourself to protect your heart, hit that subscribe button and join me for a story about love, money, and the moment I finally showed them who I really was. I grew up with wealth, but you'd never know it by looking at me. My parents built a tech company from nothing, sold it for millions when I was in high school, but they raised me to understand the value of money. I live in a modest apartment, drive a reliable but ordinary car, and work a normal 9-to-5 marketing job that I genuinely love. Most people assume I'm just getting by like everyone else. And honestly, I prefer it that way. That's how it was the day I met James. I was working on my laptop at this little coffee shop downtown, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I'd ordered my usual black coffee when this guy at the next table leaned over and asked if I'd watch his stuff while he went to the bathroom. When he came back, he thanked me with a fresh coffee and asked if the seat across from me was taken. One conversation led to another, and before I knew it, we'd been talking for 3 hours. What I loved about James was how genuine he seemed. He was working as an architect at a mid-sized firm, passionate about sustainable design, and never once asked what I did for a living until our second date. When money did come up, it was always casual, splitting checks, taking turns paying for dinners. It felt refreshingly normal. After 2 months of dating, I was falling for him, and that's when I realized I had a decision to make. Should I tell him about my family's wealth? About the trust fund that could let me retire tomorrow if I wanted? I'd seen how money changed relationships before. My college boyfriend had started treating me like an ATM once he found out. Friends had come out of the woodwork asking for investments in their latest schemes. So I decided to wait. I wanted James to know me, the real me, before money complicated things. 6 months into our relationship, James invited me to his parents' house for dinner. They lived in one of those gated communities with perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. His mother answered the door in designer clothes, pearls gleaming around her neck, while his father immediately asked what neighborhood I lived in. Their smiles tightened when I mentioned my area of town. Throughout dinner, the questions felt like an interrogation. What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? Did I have plans to advance in my career? James looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene much. His younger sister openly scrolled through my social media at the table, making comments about my basic fashion choices. "Marketing is such an interesting field," his mother said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Though I imagine the pay isn't what someone would hope for long term." That night in the car, James apologized. "They're just protective," he said. "They've always had certain expectations." I brushed it off, told him it was fine. But the next week, I overheard him on the phone with his mother. He thought I was in the shower. "Mom, just because she doesn't come from money doesn't mean anything. No, she's not after my inheritance. That's ridiculous." My stomach dropped. Gold digger. That's what they thought I was. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I stayed quiet. I told myself it didn't matter what they thought. I was with James because I loved him, not because of what he had. But as weeks passed and we kept seeing his family, I could feel their judgment like a weight on my shoulders. The whispers, the side eyes, the backhanded compliments. I just didn't know then how much worse it would get. Or that eventually, I'd have no choice but to reveal the truth. As our relationship approached the 1-year mark, James and I grew closer, but so did the shadow of his family's disapproval. They invited us to every family function, Sunday brunches, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and each time, their comments became less subtle. I started to dread these events, plastering on a smile while his mother found new ways to remind me I wasn't what she had in mind for her son. James's ex, Rebecca, just made partner at her law firm, she mentioned casually over Easter dinner. Such ambition. Don't you think ambition is attractive, James? He would squeeze my hand under the table, but rarely challenge them directly. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. There was the weekend at their lake house when his father cornered me on the dock. "What are your intentions with my son?" he asked bluntly, swirling expensive scotch in his glass. "James has a bright future. Family money that's taken generations to build." His eyes narrowed. "I've seen your type before. Women who see a comfortable life and latch on." I was so stunned I could barely respond, just mumbled something about loving James for who he was, not what he had. He chuckled like I'd told a mildly amusing joke. I started noticing changes in how James and I related to money. He began insisting on paying for more things, almost as if to prove I wasn't using him. When I offered to split the bill for a weekend getaway, he seemed almost offended. "I've got it covered," he said quickly, pulling out his credit card before I could even reach for my wallet. Was he trying to demonstrate his worth to me, or was he starting to believe his family's narrative? One night, we were having dinner with his college friends when one of them asked how we could afford our upcoming trip to Italy. Before I could answer, James jumped in. "I've been saving up." He threw me a quick glance, almost apologetic. The message was clear. He didn't want his friends thinking I was paying my way. It was easier to let them assume he was covering everything. The worst incident happened at his sister's engagement party. I overheard her and her friends in the bathroom, not realizing I was in one of the stalls. "I don't know what James sees in her," his sister said. "She's nice enough, I guess, but so ordinary. No connections, no family money, not even particularly ambitious. Total gold digger," one friend replied. "She's playing the long game, betting he'll propose before he realizes she's just after the trust fund." They all laughed, and I sat there, frozen, tears burning behind my eyes. I waited until they left before emerging, splashing cold water on my face and staring at my reflection. Why was I putting myself through this? Why was I protecting people who thought so little of me? That night, I finally confronted James. "Your family thinks I'm with you for your money," I said as we drove home. "And you're not doing anything to change their minds." He sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "They're just protective. They'll come around once they get to know you better." "It's been a year, James. They've had plenty of time to get to know me." "What do you want me to do? Cut them off? They're my family." I turned to look out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. "I want you to stand up for me. For us." James reached for my hand. "I love you. Isn't that what matters?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, it did matter. Not the money, but the respect. The trust. And with each passing day, I felt those things slipping away. 2 weeks later, James proposed. It wasn't a complete surprise. We'd talked about marriage before. But the timing felt reactionary, like he was trying to prove something. Still, I loved him. I said yes. I thought maybe, just maybe, being his fiancée would finally make his family accept me. I was wrong. So very wrong. Because that's when his mother decided to take matters into her own hands. In the most humiliating way possible. James's parents insisted on hosting an engagement dinner at Le Ciel, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. "Our treat," his mother said with a thin smile, in a tone that suggested she was doing me a favor I could never afford to return. I spent hours getting ready that night, putting on my nicest dress. Nothing designer, but elegant enough. James picked me up looking nervous, adjusting his tie repeatedly during the drive. "It'll be fine," I assured him, though I didn't believe it myself. "They're making an effort. That's something, right?" The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. James's entire family was there. His parents, his sister and her fiancée, 2 aunts, an uncle, and his grandmother who'd flown in specially from Phoenix. They all greeted me with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Dinner progressed with superficial pleasantries. Everyone asked about wedding plans. When, where, how many guests. while carefully avoiding any mention of how we might pay for it all. I caught James's mother watching me calculate the wine prices on the menu. The judgment in her eyes was unmistakable. Dessert arrived. Some elaborate chocolate creation with gold leaf, along with champagne for a toast. James's father stood, glass raised, and spoke about family legacy, tradition, and welcoming new members who understand what it means to join our circle. His emphasis on understand wasn't subtle. Then his mother reached into her designer handbag and pulled out an envelope. "Before we get too carried away with wedding plans," she said, sliding it across the table toward me, "we thought it would be prudent to discuss some practicalities." I didn't need to open it to know what it was. A prenuptial agreement. Silence fell over the table as everyone watched for my reaction. My cheeks burned with humiliation. James looked stunned, then angry. "Mom, what are you doing?" he hissed. "We haven't even discussed this." "It's just a precaution, dear," she replied smoothly. "Every smart couple should have one these days." His sister nodded. "It's not personal. It's just about protecting family assets." "From me," I said quietly. "You want to protect your money from me." "Well, you can hardly blame us," his mother replied, dropping all pretense. "We know nothing about your background, your family. James tells us you're private about these things. And you must understand, with James's position and inheritance, there are certain expectations." "What my wife means," his father interjected, "is that we've worked hard to provide for our children. We need to ensure that effort is respected." I looked at James, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just sat there, conflict written all over his face. In that moment, I realized he was torn. He loved me, yes, but part of him wondered too. Had I been with him all this time because of his family's money? Something broke inside me. A year of sideways glances, whispered comments, and thinly veiled accusations crashed down all at once. I'd tried to be understanding. I'd hidden who I was to protect what we had. And for what? To sit here and be humiliated? I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. "I've never cared about your money," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not once. And you know what's funny? This whole time, you've been so worried about me being after your wealth, when the truth is—" I took a deep breath. "I have more money than all of you combined." Their faces froze in various expressions of disbelief. James's mother actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "My parents founded Evergreen Tech. They sold it for $340 million when I was 19. I have a trust fund that's worth more than your entire family estate. I live in a modest apartment because I choose to. I drive a normal car because I like it. I work a regular job because it fulfills me." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and placed it on the table, turning it toward them. "Here's my primary account, just one of several. Feel free to count the zeros." The silence that followed was deafening. James's mother's face had gone pale. His father stared at my phone screen, blinking rapidly. His sister's mouth hung open in a perfect O. But it was James's expression that gutted me. Shock, confusion, and something else. Betrayal. He looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. I gathered my purse, hands trembling slightly. "Because I wanted someone to love me for me. Not my family name, not my bank account, just me." I placed my napkin beside my barely touched dessert. Guess we were both worried about the wrong things. And then I walked out, leaving them all staring after me, the prenup still sitting unopened on the table. I spent that night in a hotel, ignoring the flood of texts and calls from James. I needed space to think, to process what had happened. The look on everyone's faces when I revealed the truth. Shock giving way to embarrassment, then a calculating recalibration, kept replaying in my mind. But it was James's expression of betrayal that haunted me most. Had I been wrong to keep this secret for so long? 3 days passed before I finally agreed to meet him. We chose neutral ground, a park bench overlooking the lake where we'd had our third date. The memory felt like it belonged to different people now. "You lied to me," were his first words when he sat down. No hello, no preamble. "I never lied," I countered. "I just didn't volunteer information about my family's wealth." "A lie of omission is still a lie." His voice was tight, controlled. "I told you everything about me, about my life. I thought we had trust." "Would you have trusted my feelings if you'd known from the beginning? Would you have wondered if every gift was just me flaunting my money? If every 'I love you' was genuine?" I turned to face him fully. "Your family assumed the worst about me based on nothing. Why would I think you'd be any different?" He ran his hands through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Because I'm not them. I've never cared about money or status the way they do." "Really? Then why did you never stand up to them? Why did you let them treat me like I wasn't good enough for over a year?" The question hung between us, unanswered. We both knew why. Because deep down, some part of him had absorbed their values, their concerns. He hadn't been certain enough of me to defend me completely. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For hours, we unpacked everything. His complex relationship with his family's expectations, my fear of being valued only for my wealth, the ways we'd both been unfair to each other. It was painful, raw, but necessary. Meanwhile, his family launched a full-court press to repair the damage. His mother called with a tearful apology. "I completely misjudged you," she said, as if her revelation about my wealth had suddenly made me worthy of her son. His father sent an expensive gift basket to my apartment with a handwritten note about new beginnings. His sister invited me to lunch, suddenly interested in being friends. Their transparent attempts to ingratiate themselves now that they knew I was wealthy disgusted me more than their previous disdain. At least their contempt had been honest. This fawning felt calculated, confirming everything I'd feared about how money changes relationships. "They want to have us over for dinner," James said a week after our park bench conversation. "They feel terrible. They want to make it right." "Do they feel terrible about how they treated me? Or terrible about being wrong?" I asked. "Would they be this apologetic if I were actually just a middle-class marketing manager?" James had no answer for that. The truth was, we both knew they wouldn't be. And that knowledge changed things between us. I started noticing subtle shifts in our dynamic. James became hesitant about financial decisions, second-guessing himself. When I offered to pay for dinner, he'd tense up slightly. When I mentioned potentially buying a home together, he immediately brought up contributing equally, his pride clearly wounded. The easiness we'd once had was replaced by an awkward dance around money and what it meant to both of us. 2 weeks after the disastrous engagement dinner, we met again at our favorite coffee shop, back where it all began. The nostalgia wasn't lost on either of us. "I've been thinking," I said, turning my mug in circles. "Maybe we rushed into this engagement." James nodded slowly, a sad acknowledgement in his eyes. "Because of my family? Not just them. Because we both kept parts of ourselves hidden. You never showed me how much their approval mattered to you. I never trusted you with the full truth about me. What else don't we know about each other?" "I do love you," he said quietly. "That hasn't changed." I reached across the table for his hand. "I love you too. But love isn't always enough. We need trust, honesty, and right now, I'm not sure we have that foundation." The engagement ring felt heavy on my finger as we sat in silence, both realizing we were at a crossroads. We had decisions to make. About us. About the future. About what mattered most in the relationship we'd built on partial truths and unspoken fears. James and I decided to take a break. Not a breakup, just space to figure out what we truly wanted. I spent a month traveling alone, visiting places I'd always wanted to see. The Amalfi Coast, Kyoto, New Zealand. For the first time in years, I lived openly as myself, not hiding my wealth or monitoring my spending. It was liberating, but also lonely. I missed him more than I wanted to admit. When I returned, I found clarity I hadn't expected. The problem wasn't that I had money or that James's family had initially thought I didn't. The problem was that I'd built a relationship on partial truths, just as James had by never confronting his family's values. We'd both been living inauthentically, afraid to fully reveal ourselves. We met at a rooftop restaurant downtown, neutral territory with a view of the city we both loved. The month apart had changed us both. James looked different somehow, more confident, more centered. "I told my parents I wouldn't be bringing anyone home for their approval anymore," he said after we ordered drinks. "That whoever I choose to love is my decision alone." "How did that go over?" I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled wryly. "About as well as you'd expect. But it was overdue. This whole situation made me realize how much I've let their expectations shape my life." He paused. "They're trying, though. My mom's even seeing a therapist to work through her issues with control and status anxiety, as she puts it." I couldn't help but laugh at that. "Wow, that's unexpected. What about you?" he asked. "Did your soul-searching adventure bring any revelations?" I gazed out at the city lights before answering. I realized I've been hiding behind this normal life partly because I was afraid of being judged, but also because I was judging myself, as if having wealth somehow made my achievements or feelings less authentic. I turned back to him. "I don't want to hide anymore, not from you, not from anyone." We spent hours talking that night, really talking, with an honesty that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I told him about growing up wealthy but watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion, about the guilt I felt for having opportunities others didn't, about my fear that nothing I accomplished would truly be my own. He shared his complicated feelings about family legacy, about wanting to forge his own path while still honoring his parents' sacrifices. "So, where does this leave us?" he finally asked as the restaurant closed around us. I took a deep breath. "I think we built our relationship on a shaky foundation, but I also think we have a chance to rebuild it, the right way this time, with complete honesty." 2 months later, we decided to try again. Not the engagement. We both agreed that had been premature, but dating, slowly, openly. James attended therapy to work through his family issues. I started being more transparent about my financial situation and made efforts to connect with his family in a genuine way, without either resentment or appeasement. It wasn't easy. His mother still occasionally made tone-deaf comments about money. I still sometimes caught myself withholding parts of my life out of habit. But each time, we addressed it directly instead of letting resentment build. 6 months after that fateful dinner, I finally brought James to meet my parents at their lake house. They're surprisingly down-to-earth people despite their wealth. My dad still fixes his own cars, and my mom clips coupons out of habit from their early struggling days. They welcomed James warmly, making no mention of his family's previous behavior. "I get it now," he said that night as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. "Why you are the way you are. They raised you to see beyond money." "Money amplifies who you already are," I replied, remembering my dad's words. "It doesn't define you unless you let it." A year has passed since then. James and I are still together, taking things day by day. We've learned that wealth, having it or not having it, is just one aspect of a person's life, not their defining characteristic. His family has gradually come around, though I doubt his mother and I will ever be best friends. That's okay. Respect is more important than affection. As for James and me, we're looking at buying a house together, something we both contribute to in our own ways. He's starting his own architectural firm focused on affordable, sustainable housing, and I'm helping with the initial investment while continuing my marketing career. It feels balanced, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. The engagement ring remains in a drawer for now. Maybe someday we'll be ready for that step again. Maybe not. What matters is that if we do decide to get married, it will be with our eyes wide open, accepting each other completely. Flaws, family baggage, financial disparities, and all. I've learned that real love isn't about what you have or don't have. It's not about appearances or family approval. It's about seeing someone clearly, their true self, not a curated version, and choosing them anyway. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to let someone know all of you, even the parts you're afraid might push them away. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been honest from the beginning. Would we have avoided all that pain? Or was this journey, messy and difficult as it was, necessary for us both to grow? I don't have the answer. But I do know that I'm no longer afraid of being judged for my wealth or questioned about my intentions. I am who I am. A woman who happens to have money but refuses to be defined by it. And that, more than any bank account, is the true wealth I've gained from this experience. Thanks for coming along on this emotional roller coaster. If my story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who's been misjudged. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that prove appearances aren't always what they seem.